The church bells were already ringing when I stepped onto the marble steps, 10 minutes past the start of the ceremony. White roses spilled from golden urns at the entrance, each one pristine, perfect, like her reputation. A girl in a blush pink dress offered me a program. I didn't take it. I wasn't here to celebrate. Inside, soft music threaded through the vaulted ceilings. Guests murmured in polite tones, their voices rising and falling like a tide of well-meaning ignorance. I walked slowly down the aisle, my heels echoing against stone, drawing eyes. A woman near the back tilted her head at me, recognition flickering. Then her face changed. Tightened. She remembered. 3 rows from the altar. I stopped. Just close enough to see Dana McAllister standing beneath a veil, so sheer you could still make out the smile she wore like armor. The groom looked at her like she was sunlight bottled. Poor man. I waited until the priest cleared his throat. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here. I'm sorry, I said. My voice was calm, measured, but it sliced through the sanctuary like glass under pressure. Dana's head snapped toward me. So did every other. The groom looked confused. She looked terrified. That's when I reached into my coat pocket and held up the manila envelope. I thought you might want to open this before the vows. Monday mornings had always been ritualistic. Coffee brewed before the sun rose. Hair tied neatly, lips painted with a neutral tone, heels polished to click against linoleum with practiced precision. Westbury and Fields wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, predictable, a foundation. Until it wasn't. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of overcast morning where the sky looked smudged and the city smelled like wet concrete. She had arrived 15 minutes early as always, her ID badge swinging gently as she passed through the glass doors. The receptionist had smiled, a tight, distant curve of the lips that hinted something had already shifted in the air. She didn't recognize it then. She would later. By 10:17 a.m., she no longer had a desk. There had been no warning, no formal complaint. Just a quiet request to step into the HR conference room, a beige-walled vacuum where the air itself seemed filtered through legalese and passive aggression. The head of HR looked apologetic. The department manager looked at her hands. They spoke of a pattern of behavior, of concerns raised, of liability, but never specifics. There was no rage in her. Not then. Only the sensation of dropping, like a misstep on stairs where your stomach flips before your brain understands what's happening. She signed what she was told to sign. The severance papers felt cold, even though her fingers burned. By noon, her inbox was locked. Her employee login suspended. Her building access revoked. She walked home instead of taking the train. It was 4 miles through city streets, past cafes she'd once frequented on lunch breaks, boutiques she'd passed on the way to Dana's office to share harmless gossip or swap granola bars during deadline weeks. The betrayal didn't announce itself like a scream. It arrived slowly, quietly, like a bruise forming beneath the skin. Dana McAllister. Of course, she hadn't believed it at first. Dana was newer, younger, charming in a rehearsed kind of way, always just lucky, whenever praised by the executives. But she had potential. That's what they all said. And she had asked for help so often in those early months. She had given it freely. But whispers had started months ago. A project file that had mysteriously vanished. A conversation taken out of context. A comment repeated with a different tone. Small cracks in the wall she didn't see until the whole thing collapsed. It had taken just one conversation, one suggestion, that she was too assertive in meetings, or perhaps difficult to collaborate with. From the wrong mouth, those words had teeth. And Dana had always known how to smile with hers. She spent the first week sending emails, updating her resume, making excuses to friends. Restructuring, she said. Internal politics. Harmless phrases that didn't come close to naming the truth. That someone had slit her professional throat and walked away in a white dress. In the second week, the silence started. Recruiters stopped replying. Calls ended with polite regrets. The industry was smaller than she thought, and reputations moved faster than resumes. The financial anxiety came next. The severance package would barely stretch 2 months. Her rent was due. Utilities stacked like dominoes. She clipped coupons, canceled subscriptions, sold 2 handbags, stared at a bag of lentils and tried to feel grateful. But it wasn't hunger that kept her up at night. It was the questions. How could Dana have done it? There was no confrontation, no warning, just a slow erosion of goodwill, engineered with precision. She thought about the afternoon last spring when Dana showed up crying in the office bathroom after a bad client call. She had handed her tissues, told her she'd be fine. Had it already started then? She didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal or the fact that she'd welcomed it in. There were days she didn't get out of bed until noon. Days she wandered aimlessly through her apartment, touching furniture as if to remind herself that she still existed. She stopped wearing makeup. Her mirror no longer offered reassurance, only questions about what had made her so easy to erase. One day, she found herself scrolling through Dana's social media. A polished feed, brunches, boardrooms, bridal showers. Dana was engaged now. The ring sparkled under filtered light, and the fiancé, Bryce something, grinned beside her in pastel shirts and boat shoes. They looked happy. And then came the photo. It appeared one afternoon in the mailbox. A plain manila envelope, unmarked. She assumed it was a credit card offer or junk mail. Inside, a folded photograph. Dana in a fitted white gown, mid-laugh, flanked by bridesmaids in ivory. But it wasn't the image that made her stomach turn, it was the reflection. Behind Dana stood Thomas Hale, their former department director, and the man who had once, in private, praised her as irreplaceable. In the mirror's edge, their hands were clasped. Not accidental. On the back of the photo, someone had written a sentence in neat, looping script. Before you burn a bridge, be sure you're not still standing on it. She sat at the table for a long time, fingers pressed to the glossy surface of the photo, her heartbeat louder than the city traffic outside. Not angry. Not yet. Just cold with understanding. Dana hadn't just sabotaged her career. She'd done it to clear the path. Suddenly, the whispers made sense. The selective gossip. The last-minute project reassignments. The compliments that used to come from Thomas, and then suddenly didn't. It wasn't ambition. It was design. She pressed the photograph flat against the table and stared until her eyes burned. This wasn't about a job anymore. It was about identity. About being erased. About having the narrative stolen and rewritten without her consent. For weeks, she had been grieving the wrong thing. She wasn't fired. She was framed. She stood, the chair legs scraping the floor sharply. For the first time in a month, her reflection didn't look defeated. It looked like something waiting. In her closet, pushed behind work blazers and dresses she hadn't worn since interviews dried up, was a long black coat. Tailored. Quiet. Assertive. She laid it on the bed and sat beside it, breathing deeply. The invitation had arrived weeks ago, Dana's wedding. She had laughed when she received it. Laughed so hard she nearly cried. She had meant to throw it out. She hadn't. Now, she unfolded it again. Heavy cardstock. White embossed letters. Cathedral venue. Formal attire. The sort of ceremony built for appearances. Dana had always loved appearances. And she had something that didn't fit into appearances. The truth. The photograph still sat on the kitchen table. She reached for it, and this time, slid it carefully back into the envelope. Whatever came next wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be angry. It wouldn't be theatrical. It would be honest. The envelope lived on her kitchen table for days. She didn't touch it again, not at first. Just let it sit, quiet, unassuming, heavy with implications. Every morning she passed it, she felt its presence like static in the air. Unsent, unsigned, unspoken. And yet it said everything. She'd begun to watch the world differently. The clatter of a wedding dress commercial on television felt personal. Bridal magazines at the corner store flashed Dana's smile. Even the supermarket flower aisle bloomed in white like mocking laughter. Some mornings, she walked 3 blocks past her building to clear her head. The wind bit through her coat and numbed her skin. But it cleared the static, too. Cold made things feel clean. Almost manageable. On one of those walks, she caught sight of Dana again, by chance or design, stepping into a bakery, white beret pulled low, speaking into her phone with the ease of someone who never looked over her shoulder. There was no recognition, no hesitation. Dana hadn't seen her. Or perhaps she had and simply didn't consider her a threat. It didn't matter. The moment passed like a match struck in wind, brief, hot, gone. But something stayed behind, smoldering. She returned home and picked up the envelope for the first time since it arrived. Slid the photo out again. Studied the image closely now, not Dana's face, not the dress, not even the subtle tilt of Thomas Hale's head toward her like gravity couldn't help itself. It was the background. The mirror's angle. A trick of reflection that showed more than it should. A secret carelessly kept. And suddenly she saw everything differently. She spent the evening scanning through old emails, archived messages, internal memos from Westbury and Fields. Notes she'd almost deleted in a purge of pain. There, threaded between the mundane and the routine, were small markers. Dana copying senior executives unnecessarily. Redundant reports submitted an hour before she submitted hers. Subtle professional one-upmanship she'd mistaken for harmless ambition. But the timestamps were surgical. Even now, she didn't feel anger so much as evidence. The slow stacking of inconsistencies that she had been too trusting or too tired to string together before. In the final email she ever received from Thomas Hale, dated exactly 1 week before her firing, he'd written, "Appreciate your insight on the Jacobs file, but let's hold back on presenting that approach just yet. Dana may have something in the works." She had ignored the slight at the time. Had assumed it was temporary, collaborative, part of mentorship. Now it read like a warning. She printed everything. Stacked the papers neatly into a folder. On the last page, she clipped the photograph. Not for revenge. Not to burn the church down. To make sure, when the truth came out, it didn't whisper. It rang. By the 3rd week of April, she had regained something she hadn't realized she'd lost, her voice. Not the one that spoke in meetings or carried project presentations, but the quiet, internal one that could still recognize right from wrong, even if no one else would say it out loud. That was the week she called a friend from her past life. A paralegal named Elise who once said, "People don't always get fired for the wrong reasons. They just get framed for the right ones." She didn't say much, just asked Elise how one might document a pattern without a lawsuit. Elise didn't ask why. She only offered to meet. They sat over lukewarm coffee in a bookstore cafe, leafing through annotated printouts and whispering like conspirators. Elise tapped the envelope twice and said only, "This doesn't belong to her." Not anymore. Later that evening, the invitation resurfaced. She had tucked it in a drawer, half out of denial, half out of morbid curiosity. The cathedral's name shimmered in silver foil. A list of events followed: the ceremony, the cocktail hour, the private dinner. The language was bloated with grandeur, words like reception ballroom and exclusive guest list. She was not supposed to be on that list. She had never RSVP'd. But the doorman wouldn't know that. Not if she walked in with the right confidence, the right shoes, and the right story. The kind that was real. That night, she cleaned the black coat and found a pair of heels she hadn't worn since her final office presentation. They fit the same. Slightly tight across the toes, but commanding on tile. She tried them on in front of her mirror and didn't look away this time. This wasn't about destroying Dana. It was about reclaiming the space her silence had given away. She spent the next few days in motion. Subtle changes. She rewrote her resume, not to erase the wound, but to frame it differently. She opened a new bank account, changed passwords, backed up everything. She cleared her voicemail box. And on the morning of the wedding, she packed the envelope in her bag, alongside the folded stack of documents and a small handwritten note to herself. Do not forget who you are. Even if they did. The walk to the cathedral was short. 2 subway stops, 1 block west, past the bookstore where Elise still worked on weekends. The day was unseasonably warm. Spring creeping in as if unsure of its welcome. She arrived 15 minutes after the posted start time. Not too late to be stopped. Not too early to be ignored. The usher smiled without recognizing her and gestured politely to the program table. She passed it without pause. Inside, light streamed through stained glass windows that bathed the white and gold decor in a kaleidoscope of color. It was beautiful. Dana had always known how to choose things that looked perfect. But not everything that shines is clean. She moved to the center aisle. The scent of roses mixed with perfume and polished wood. The music was soft, ceremonial. Guests whispered greetings and adjusted their posture for photos. She walked forward, heel by heel. Steady. And in her coat pocket, the envelope waited. Silent. Waited. Truth folded into itself like a blade beneath silk. The cathedral's air held a reverent hush, the kind of silence designed to suppress imperfection. Ornate archways curved above her like arms folded in judgment, while sunlight poured through stained glass with the soft precision of an accusation. Every detail had been curated, floral arrangements in tied ivory bundles, gold-trimmed programs laid on each seat. Even the string quartet in the corner, brushing bows against strings as if afraid to play too loud. She stood at the edge of the pews, her coat still buttoned, the envelope secure inside. No one stopped her. She was neither invited nor forbidden. In a room full of certainty, she was the only question. And that gave her power. She didn't walk further in. Not yet. There was time. Instead, she moved to the back of the cathedral, near a tall marble column where the shadows pooled. From here, she could see Dana at the altar. Lace sleeves, long train, veil perfectly aligned. A tableau of poise. But the image faltered the longer she looked. Dana didn't fidget, but her body was too still. Not serene controlled. Her hand clenched slightly around the bouquet, and her smile, so practiced, didn't quite meet her eyes. There was something else too. The way Thomas Hale stood off to the side of the groom's family, unacknowledged but unmistakably present. His posture casual, his gaze rarely leaving Dana. This wasn't a wedding. It was a performance. And for the first time in weeks, she felt clarity like a blade. She stepped away from the column and moved toward the restroom hallway. In the privacy of the powder room, surrounded by porcelain and polished brass, she stood before the mirror. Her reflection was pale under the lighting, but grounded. The woman looking back at her was older than she'd felt a month ago, and somehow more solid. She unbuttoned the coat slowly. Underneath, a charcoal dress, simple, structured. Nothing flashy. Nothing to distract. She applied a soft lipstick and ran her fingers through her hair to smooth the wind's chaos. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope. It felt almost warm from the press of her palm. Not heavy now. Just waiting. She thought briefly of the years she had poured into her job. The nights she stayed late. The weekends she sacrificed. The effort to be useful, steady, trusted. All erased by one whispered lie, one planted doubt, watered by ambition and sealed with a smile. Dana had taken her job, her credibility, her reputation, but not her truth. And truth, when timed right, didn't need to shout. She left the powder room and stepped back into the echoing hush of the cathedral. Guests were seated now. The quartet's final notes faded. The priest cleared his throat and stepped forward. Dana and her groom turned to face each other beneath the arch of roses. The ceremony began. She didn't walk immediately. She waited until the vows. The moment when every heart in the room leaned forward. The point when silence wasn't just quiet, but sacred. She stepped into the aisle then, unrushed, heels clicking steadily against stone. She didn't speak at first. Didn't need to. The sound of her movement alone drew attention. Heads turned. A rustle of confusion passed through the pews. Dana saw her. And in that instant, the bride's expression changed, not panic, but recognition. A flicker of calculation, then fear. She didn't speak. Her grip on the bouquet tightened. The groom looked between them, bewildered. She reached into her coat pocket and drew out the envelope. Paused. Held it in the light. And then, with calm precision, she walked toward the front. Not all the way to the altar, just far enough. No chaos. No outburst. Just presence. She extended the envelope and laid it on the edge of the platform, between the couple and the priest. Her hand rested there a moment longer, pressing the truth gently into view. And only then did she speak. Not to the room. Not to the guests. Just to Dana. A single sentence. You forgot to include the whole story. And then she turned. No one followed. No one needed to. The silence she left behind said more than anything she could have screamed. She didn't look back. Didn't need to see the expressions. The groom's confusion, the priest's hesitation, Dana's unraveling composure. The envelope would do its work. She exited the cathedral into the brightness of early afternoon, the sky washed clean by the sun. No applause. No confrontation. Just breath. The kind that comes after holding it too long. She didn't know what would happen inside. If the wedding would continue. If the groom would open the envelope then or later. If the whispers would begin in the foyer or in the honeymoon suite. It didn't matter. The truth had been placed where it belonged, in the open. And that was enough. She walked 3 blocks in silence, letting the city noise wash over her, horns, footsteps, fragments of conversation. Life, unbothered. She moved through it quietly, part of it again. That evening, at home, she poured a glass of water and opened her windows. The spring air slipped in cool against her skin. In the corner, a stack of legal documents remained, proof, patterns, printed emails. But she didn't need them anymore. Tomorrow, She would submit a new application to a smaller firm, one known for clean practices and slower pace. Maybe she'd finally pursue the certification she'd put off, or something else entirely. Tonight, she would simply sleep. And for the first time in weeks, she wouldn't dream of loss. She would dream of space, of silence made honest, of what comes after reclamation. The envelope made more noise after she left than while it was in her hand. She didn't see the groom's face change when he opened it, but someone else described it to her later, the slow unraveling of confidence, as if someone had pulled a thread from the edge of his smile. The contents were simple: one photograph, 2 emails, a printout of internal correspondence with a handwritten note at the bottom. If she can lie this easily to a company, ask what she's capable of lying about to you. Not angry, not aggressive, just true. By the time she reached home, her phone had begun to buzz. An unknown number first, then another. She ignored them. Let the notifications stack like unanswered questions. Her inbox, too, had new arrivals. Messages forwarded from old colleagues, a subject line reading, "What happened?" and another, "You were right." But none of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was that she could breathe again without the weight of pretending everything was fine. She ran a bath, something she hadn't done in months. The water filled slowly, and she sat at the edge, watching the steam rise. When she finally lowered herself in, the warmth shocked her, not because of the temperature, but because of what it represented: permission. To pause. To exist without defending herself. Outside, the world spun on. Somewhere, Dana was explaining, deflecting, unraveling. The cathedral had likely emptied in a hush of murmurs, with floral arrangements left to wilt beside empty pews. The groom may have walked out, or he may have stayed, frozen not by loyalty, but disbelief. But inside this small apartment, none of that intruded. Only silence. Only space. In the following days, the story grew legs. Quiet ones at first, whispers between former coworkers, subtle shifts in LinkedIn connections, a thread of mutual contacts beginning to re-engage. Someone from HR reached out. Not officially, just to check in. The tone was cautious. They had questions now. Questions they hadn't bothered to ask when they let her go. She didn't respond right away. Let them sit in the uncertainty she had been forced to occupy for months. When she finally answered, it was with documents, not dialogue. A neatly compiled folder of evidence, dates, messages, timestamps. She didn't accuse. She didn't demand. She submitted facts. And the silence on the other end said everything. Eventually, she received an apology, not from a person, but from a system. An email filled with legal phrasing, language as sterile as the conference room where they dismantled her career. There would be no lawsuit. She had no appetite for it. The damage had already been done, but so had the recovery. She wasn't the same woman they fired. And Dana wasn't the woman they promoted. 2 weeks after the wedding, a mutual friend texted her. It didn't go through. He walked. Her parents are furious. She's laying low. Another message came from Elise. You lit the match without touching fire. It's admirable. But she didn't feel like a hero. Not even victorious. Just whole. And in this story, that was enough. One afternoon, she sat on the bench outside the bakery where she'd once spotted Dana. The same wind pushed through the awnings. The same woman behind the counter swept crumbs off the sidewalk with the same casual rhythm. But the air felt different now. No one was watching her. No one was whispering. She wasn't defined by what had been taken from her, but by what she had chosen to take back. Not with noise. Not with revenge. With proof. With presence. With the unyielding power of refusing to disappear. 6 months later, autumn returned to the city in quiet rustlings. Orange leaves dragging along the sidewalks. The scent of chimney smoke curling above rooftops. The kind of weather that made everything seem softer, even endings. She no longer walked with tension in her shoulders. No longer woke to the dull ache of injustice in her chest. The apartment felt lived in again, plants growing in the windowsill, books stacked in uneven towers on the floor. It hadn't been decorated, just allowed to become something honest. On her desk sat a framed photo, not of the past, but of the present. A group of co-workers from her new job. Smaller firm, cleaner structure, less prestige, More humanity. They knew her as competent, steady, funny in dry moments. No baggage, just presence. She liked it that way. The old firm had never contacted her again. After the HR email, the silence returned, this time deserved. Dana had vanished from the corporate world spotlight. Her name lingered in Google results beneath short-lived headlines. Bride exposed at altar. Corporate climber falls hard. Clickbait titles that missed the point entirely. The truth wasn't about Dana. It had been about the space she had tried to steal and the woman who refused to surrender it. One evening, she received a letter. Handwritten. No return address, but she knew the handwriting. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know. I see it now. What I did. Who I became. It wasn't ambition. It was cowardice. And I'm sorry. She folded the letter carefully and slid it into a box in her closet, between old journals and things not yet needed but not quite gone. Forgiveness was never the goal. Freedom was. She poured herself tea and stepped out onto her small balcony. The street below buzzed with the quiet rhythm of a Wednesday evening, neighbors walking dogs, porch lights flicking on, someone laughing too loud a few floors down. The normalcy of it all felt profound. A year ago, her world had shattered. Not from fire or fury, but from silence, insinuation, and betrayal carried out behind closed doors. But now? Now she stood in the stillness of having survived, of having reclaimed. She no longer watched Dana's life from behind a screen, no longer traced the ruins. That story had ended where it needed to. What remained was hers to build, quietly, solidly, truthfully. Not a new version of herself, but the original, finally uninterrupted. She closed her eyes, letting the air move through her like wind through trees. The kind of wind that doesn't break branches, just clears what's already dead. Tomorrow would be ordinary. And for the first time in a long time, that felt extraordinary.